right, good afternoon. Today we'll be discussing the how and why of Fabric's migration of Xytech to AWS. Hi, I'm Naima, an account manager at AWS, and I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Delf, Fabric's CEO. Rob, welcome.
Well, thank you, Naima. I'm delighted to be here as well. It's been a really interesting, it's been an interesting, and incredible journey of what we went through and are currently going through wrapping up. So I'm super happy to talk about it and, go through it all with everyone here.
Rob, to kick things off, could you tell us a little bit about Fabric and the role cloud infrastructure plays in your business?
Absolutely. So, Fabric is an organization entrenched in the media supply chain. We have 4 different products. Our studio product it's a SaaS platform for managing titles. So you can create, author, edit, register, film and television metadata. And that is all based in AWS, using multiple services, mostly cloud native, mostly managed infrastructure. We also have a product called Xytech, which will be really the primary focus of this conversation. So Fabric merged with Xytech in September of 2024. And the story here is really like, okay, they were mostly their infrastructure was maintained in Azure. And when we merged together, we had to look across the organization and start making decisions. So that's that piece of it. So we're going to stick a pin in that one. Our 2 other products are something we call Origin, which is a master database of title information. That's the easiest way to put it. It's like a professional version of IMDb or like a IMDb Lite, and then we also, closed an acquisition 4 weeks ago of another data company that provides supply and demand information to that title catalog. And that's, BB Media. Now, BB Media is also in Azure, but we have not yet scoped out any kind of migration.
Great. So it sounds like you're creating a new version of Fabric, which brings me to the big question. Why did you migrate from your existing cloud provider to AWS?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, so a little bit of the history. We as Fabric, we had the Studio product, we had the Origin product. And when we merged together with Xytech, first thing we did was look at the infrastructure. We were experiencing, and our customers were experiencing, some latency issues and some scalability issues, within the Azure cloud. But I wouldn't say that's, partly, it has nothing to do with the capabilities of Azure itself. It was in that position, or the software was in that position, because it was very much a lift and shift from the closet to the cloud. So the migration was basically performed like, hey, the server's in that room there. Let's just create a virtual server and move everything without configuring anything to the cloud specifications. So the Xytech application itself, when we looked at the technology, is rather chatty. It's stateful. It uses a lot of Signal R. It's built on the Microsoft stack. So works great when you install it locally and you're on a local area network. As soon as you put in like many nodes in a network and run it over big distances, the application itself is calling home all the time. And so what it creates, I see lots of heads nodding. So what that creates is like hanging screens, right? Because it's basically going back and saying like, are you validating the field? What is the validation on this field? So, we knew, it's a long way of saying, when I looked at that, and, this is sort of myself, the CTO and customer feedback, we knew we were going to have to re-architect either the implementation in Azure, or we're going to have to move it somewhere else. And really what it came down to is Fabric pre-merger had a good amount of expertise and a great partnership with AWS. So if we're going to have to do the work anyway, we might as well do it with the existing skill set we had. And I'd also say, I think maybe this is my bias, but I'd much rather have all of our products on a single backend infrastructure for private pricing agreements, for consistency of skill sets, so like my DevOps across the stack can be shared. It's not going to be specific for product. And so it also mapped in with our strategy overall. I will say this, which Naima will probably appreciate. The other big thing is the presence that AWS has in the media entertainment space is kind of critical, right? Like we have customers who now we can go to who are like managed AWS customers, and we can say, hey, we're doing this migration, and we get a whole bunch of support in that partnership. It's like the AWS piece for us is just it's like a true partnership on how to make things better. So it made the migration decision a no-brainer from my side.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, AWS also has 36 regions, 114 availability zones, delivering robust reliability and scalability. Were there any limitations with your previous provider that accelerated this decision?
Yeah, actually, you brought up the region issue. The Xytech customer base is global. And they're also really, because they're mostly a lot of broadcasters and media companies who are incredibly savvy themselves in terms of their cloud infrastructure and how they're managing it. So there's no way to escape if you're telling them something and it doesn't quite check out. So because of that, we were asked by specific customers, hey, I need to be in this region because we have most of our activity in Asia Pac, and this is where we're launching events. And like they know the latency between their office and the AWS center before we even get involved, right? And so AWS having that coverage, it changes the game, because when we did the migration with our wonderful partner Commit, everything changes to infrastructure as code too. So it's like, oh, you need new implementation of Xytech running in the Northeast Virginia location. You can do it, and it's click button, push button, click button. That's not a thing. Push button. Anyway, it happens. So yes, it was a big factor.
And so once the decision was made, what were the first steps in planning this migration?
So speaking from where I sit, the scariest proposition in this is costs. So when you look at, we're running our business, well, cost and technology, but I had enough familiarity with how AWS works that I know once we get there, it's going to be great, right? But how do we get there in the middle of the journey without double paying for hosting costs? And, how are we going to get the people and the resources through to make it happen? How are we not going to disrupt any engineering efforts because we're still releasing code? Like those were the things. It's like, getting from point A to point B, it's how to manage the cost, how to manage the effort, and how to minimize any disruption on the business altogether.
Yeah, look, you raise a really good point. Migrations and modernizations aren't just a technical process. So what I gather, you were set up for success. However, things can and do go wrong. So I'm going to ask you, what would you say were the biggest challenges in terms of what was going wrong?
What was going on prior, or what was going on during
the migration?
The biggest problem that went on is we found some boogeymen in the existing technology stack that we were not prepared for. We realized we were doing authentication with local Active Directory that we were hosting centrally. So trying to figure out how to remove that without development effort, that was tricky. So I guess the challenge for us is we found some bad practices that we were doing. It shined some lights on like our infrastructure altogether. And then we had to like engineer and architect around it. But the end result was great because like, I don't think we necessarily would have known that was happening, until we got into the migration. So it's also given us like the lemonade story is it's given us an opportunity to actually clean it up.
Okay. So we've discussed why you decided to migrate, the support you received. Now that you've migrated some of your customers across, what would you say are the biggest benefits that you're seeing so far?
So The biggest benefits we're seeing right now are around stability and performance. Because as part of this, let me just give you one example of the stability and performance things. Prior, we had the API endpoints connected to virtualized servers themselves. So any one of our customers, if they got super excited on their API endpoints, could shut down the entire server, right? And force restarts in our environment. So when we talk about sort of, stability, the migration over there, of course, we implemented, elastic load balancers, API gateways. So we can that can't happen anymore. So it's sort of like, that's a huge benefit into itself. And then the second piece is actually performance, which isn't so much related to, I hate to say that, it's not related to AWS. It's actually related to containerizing the code as an effort to do this and then moving it over so it's not as chatty. So we knew that the migration wasn't a silver bullet for all things, but it has certainly improved the stability questions because we're using the managed infrastructure in AWS. And then the other thing is it's improved our ability to deploy applications. So previous world, you can open up a Jira ticket that says, hey, I need a new environment in this region, and 6 weeks later it would be done and hand-rolled and probably different than all the other ones. And today it will be done within a day and exactly to our specifications.
So building on operational efficiencies, environment standardizations, what key advice would you give to other companies that are planning a similar migration path?
I think when you factor in the costs, right, because it's always going to come down to like, oh my gosh, I got to move this over, even with the map programs, and you can kind of like make it, I guess, expense-free model if you do everything correctly. My advice would be to factor in some of the operational overhead it takes if your infrastructure is different between deployments. Because it's been shocking to us to see the molasses that it puts into our QA teams and our support teams and our engineering teams when trying to troubleshoot a bug, right? Something comes in and it's like, okay, I'm trying to replicate this, and this customer's environment is totally different than this customer's environment. The specifications of the servers are different. So how do I know that the code's not performant on this one and performant on this one? And what are the reasons why? Is it a memory problem? Is it an IO problem? Like, what is it? Because the infrastructure could be across the map. And that actually adds in a lot of operational overhead. So when you're doing the CBA on whether or not to do it, it's like that was something that came out of, like seeing the outcome and then realizing, oh, wait a second, everyone has more time because they're not spending it chasing down what are the differences between a dev and staging and production environment, which we were doing before, and a lot of work on it.
Yeah, so some of the things you've mentioned there was MAP, which is the AWS Migration Acceleration Program. There's also the private pricing agreement. So these are all platforms available from AWS to support, our customers like Fabric, in these migration processes. Now, before we open up for Q&A, are there any final thoughts you can share about the vision that you see that will shape Fabric Xytech after this migration is completed?
So this morning we had a session that was all about the future of Fabric. And we've done some acquisitions and we're bringing different product pieces together. The migration to a single cloud partner, in this process means that we can do things better, faster, and cheaper from bringing solutions to market. And I don't mean that as lip service. It's like, hey, we need to do an integration. Okay, we're all in one zone. Or, hey, we're going to try out some things with Bedrock. Okay, I don't have to do like cross-cloud authentication just to run a POC. That coupled with really, buying into or, educating the AWS channel partners and such on what we're offering, it really becomes this sort of like powerful business multiplier in our books, that we're already seeing some of the rewards of. So it's been great so far.
Yeah, thank you for the great insights, Rob. So Absolutely. We're going to open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions that are specific to AWS, we have a large area by the entrance where we have our solution architects, experts. We also have an Amazon Nova booth to the right, so I encourage you to visit those. But if we can direct the questions towards the migration and Fabric, that would be great.
Can you tell us a little bit about how your customers reacted to the migration if they were in the mix?
That's a really interesting and good question. Our customer base was heavily invested in the AWS ecosystem, primarily because of AWS's own investments into media and entertainment. We're talking, most of our customers, for those who you don't know, Fabric is, it's, kind of like the largest studios, broadcasters, distributors. So you probably know who they are. Every single one of them is a managed, not every single one of our customers, but 80% of our customers it's like a managed AWS account. And the short answer to your question is that our customers were like, hallelujah, because they can do all kinds of, the way that I had described in the previous question, the benefits of being on a single cloud platform, they now can do the same things, right? They don't have to figure out if their corporate policy allows them to work with Microsoft, because in some cases it doesn't, right? And we were kind of hiding behind it's not really here, but what, that kind of thing. But yeah, just the support. So that in general, we've had exactly zero pushback and a whole lot of happiness.
Anyone else?
Do you plan to migrate everything else to AWS on the other companies that you guys own?
Yes.
So is this specific to the recent acquisition that was announced with BB Media?
Yeah, I may not have announced that to BB Media yet. So, that's not true. They know. In fact, so the BB Media team is running on Azure plus a couple smaller providers. They're based down in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And we've already actually started. So they have a massive data set, that we want to start training some models on. So they're already working through our partnership with AWS. They're already working with the Bedrock team to actually start to ingest that. We will migrate them all over time, as it makes sense. Because right now they've got sort of pieces of every cloud provider going on. So we're going to move it over and, really get them into the fold. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the best part of that is that they are based in Argentina, and we're already planning our offsite there, with Commit, AWS, and Fabric.
We are? Yes. Okay. I'm in. I like it.
Yep. If that's everything, I'd like to thank you all for joining today, and please help me to thank Rob Delf for his wonderful insights.
And I'd like to thank Naima for having me here.